Hare Krishna. Yes, this audio has to be taken off. The laptop. Yes. Hare Krishna devotees, can you all hear me? Hare Krishna Prabhuji, yes. Yes, okay. We'll start with prayers. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tatho Jayamudirayet Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. So reading from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 6, verse 42. Atha va yoginam eva athava yoginam eva kule bhavati dhimatam kule bhavati dhimatam etat hi durlabhataram etadhi durlabhataram loke janma yat idrisham loke janma yad idrisham athava yoginam eva kule bhavati dhimatam etadhi durlabhataram loke janma yad idrisham athava yoginam eva kule bhavati dhimatam etadhi durlabhataram loke janma yad idrisham athava yoginam eva kule bhavati dhimatam etadhi durlabhataram loke janma yad idrisham athava yoginam eva kule bhavati dhimatam etadhi durlabhataram loke janma yad idrisham athava yoginam eva kule bhavati dhimatam etadhi durlabhataram loke janma yad idrisham. Online, anyone wants?
Athva
yoginam eva
kule bhavati dhimamatam
कुले भवति धीमताम् एतद्धि दुर्लभतरम् लोके जन्म यदीदृशम् अथवा योगिनामेव कुले भवति धीमताम् एतद्धि दुर्लभतरम् लोके जन्म यदीदृशम् अथवा योगिनामेव कुले भवति धीमताम् एतद्धि दुर्लभतरम् लोके जन्म यदीदृशम् अथवा योगिनामेव कुले भवति धीमताम् एतद्धि दुर्लभतरम् लोके जन्म यदीदृशम् अथवा योगिनामेव कुले भवति धीमताम् एतद्धि दुर्लभतरम् लोके जन्म यदीदृशम् अथवा योगिनामेव कुले भवति धीमताम् एतद्धि दुर्लभतरम् लोके जन्म यदीदृशम् अथवा योगिनामेव कुले भवति धीमताम् एतद्धि दुर्लभतरम् लोके जन्म यदीदृशम् Word to word meanings. अथवा or yoginam of learned transcendentalists eva certainly kule in the family of bhavati takes birth dhimatam of those who are endowed with great wisdom etat this he certainly durlabhataram very rare loke in this world janma birth yat that which idrisham like this. Translation purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation. Or he takes his birth in a family of transcendentalists who are surely great in wisdom. Verily, such a birth is rare in this world. Translation with repetition. Or he takes his birth in a family of transcendentalists who are surely great in wisdom. Verily, such a birth is rare in this world. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Birth in a family of yogis or transcendentalists, those with great wisdom, is praised herein, because the children born in such a family receive spiritual impetus from the very beginning of his life. It is especially the case in the Acharya or Goswami families. Such families are very learned and devoted by tradition and training, and thus they become spiritual masters. In India, there are many such Acharya families, but they have now degenerated due to insufficient education and training. By the grace of the Lord, there are still families that foster transcendentalists generation after generation. It is certainly very fortunate to take birth in such families. Fortunately, both our spiritual master Om Vishnupada Sri Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaja and our humble self had the opportunity to take birth in such families. By the grace of the Lord, and both of us were trained in the devotional service of the Lord from the very beginning of our lives. Later on, we met by the order of the transcendental system. Thus ends the Transcendental Bhaktivedanta purport. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. So today we are discussing verse number 42. So as we have seen this before, last week we had Sri Ramanavami festival, so it's been some time since, maybe 2 weeks since we did the previous verse. So let me just briefly summarize where we are, and then we will discuss more about the verse. So this 6th chapter is known as Sankhya Yoga. So as we saw in the very beginning of this chapter, there was description about mind being our friend or enemy. So how mind can be the greatest friend, or it can be our greatest enemy. And then starting from verses 10 to 36, there was this description about Ashtanga Yoga system, and how in this system we also saw that Arjuna admits and informs Lord that it is very difficult to control this mind. It is easier. It is easy to control maybe wind, but not the mind. And then Lord further instructs on how by detachment and constant practice one can even conquer the mind. And eventually there is discussion about the success of a yogi, who becomes successful, and how by controlling one's mind and engaging in this process of yoga one can attain highest perfection. But immediately then, as we saw even in the previous class, this question that was asked by Arjuna as what happens to one who is unsuccessful, who is not able to sustain this process of yoga when he undertakes. So as we saw, Arjuna uvacha ayati shraddhayopeto yoga chalati manasaha aprapya yoga samsiddhim kam gatim Krishna gacchati. So aprapya yoga samsiddhim. So aprapya, not achieving or failing, yoga samsiddhim. So highest perfection of yoga, if one is not able to achieve, what happens to them? So this was the question that was asked in verse number 37, and then Arjuna further says, wouldn't that person who is not successful in yoga, and now he has also given up his material life, he has given his material occupations and other engagements, now he is neither materially happy, now he is lost in his spiritual perfection. So where would he go? So the example that was given of a riven cloud. So Prabhupada explains in the purport that sometimes there is a small cloud which when it joins a big cloud, it can remain as one big unit. If it separates from the big cloud, and sometimes it just vanishes. So will the position of a person who has not perfected his spiritual life, is that similar to that of a riven cloud, that he will not be able to attain perfection either here nor there, and he is lost? So then then Arjuna says, etan me samshayam Krishna chetum arhasi asheshataha So Arjuna is requesting, Lord, this is my doubt. Please dispel it completely. But for yourself, no one is found who can destroy this doubt. So Arjuna is inquiring from the Lord, this is my doubt. And we should all know this is for the benefit of all of us that Arjuna is asking these questions to Lord. And Lord is further instructing, so that Lord is assuring that a person who is actually performing yoga or the highest well-being, so kalyanakrit, one who is engaged in auspicious activities, kashchit durgatim, so nahik durgatim. So one who is performing kalyanakrit, one who is performing auspicious activities, one who is performing these principles of spiritual life, he will never find degradation, neither in this life nor in the next life. So this is how Lord begins explaining about the process of yoga, which is which never degrades. I mean, if anyone takes to this process, there is no falling down. Rather, one only makes progress from the level where one has made progress. And then further, in the last verse we have seen, beautiful verse, prapya punya kritam lokan ushitva shashvati samaha suchinam shrimatam gehe yoga bhrashto abhichayate. So as we saw in the last verse, an unsuccessful yogi, after many, many years of enjoyment in the planet of pious people, where pious people go, where pious living entities live, now after going to the heavenly planets and living a life of material enjoyment for many, many thousands of years, then the living entity comes back to this material world. But this was the case of a person who has just progressed in life or in yoga after taking for a little while. So if one has made only little progress in yoga system and he has fallen or he has not moved further from that level of perfection, then it is for those kind of people, they stay for a certain time in the heavenly planets and then they come back to the material world. But when they come back to the material world, they take birth in the families of Suchinam and Srimatam. Suchinam means of the pious. So Prabhupada explains that usually the Brahmanas, they are very, very pious in their behavior, in their activities, in their speech, and therefore in their thinking, and therefore one is given an opportunity to take birth in a family of pious people. Or Srimatam, who are aristocratic, who are very rich, who are very prosperous. So when one takes birth in this families, one is provided with great advantage. What is the advantage? One does not have to struggle for the material endeavors like many others. For some people, just to maintain their livelihood is so difficult, and therefore they say, where is the question of us practicing spiritual life? We want to take care of our basic necessities. My eating, my shelter, my basic necessities themselves are not met, and how can I think of anything else? But in the case of people who are materially opulent, well taken care, who are born in a good Brahmana families, they are met with the basic necessities of life, and therefore they have an opportunity to focus on spiritual activities very easily. Now, moving on from previous verse, today's verse is talking about yogis who is fallen after a long time of practice. So one who has practiced yoga for a long time but still haven't achieved the perfection, what happens to them? So here it is said, athava yoginam eva kule bhavati dhimatam. So a yogi, an unsuccessful yogi who has practiced for a long time but haven't attained the success, he takes birth, bhavati, in which family? Yoginam. So in the family of learned transcendentalists. So Prabhupada is further clarifying. So in the previous verse, Prabhupada was explaining about the family of Suchinam, Srimatam, and here the Lord is explaining that they are take birth in the family of transcendentalists or the Yoginam. So this is even a higher birth in the sense there are much more facilities to advance in spiritual life, and that's why today's session is also known as spiritual impetus, because people who take birth in these families of great transcendentalists or in the family of transcendentalists who are surely great in wisdom. So what is this unique quality about people who are born in the family of transcendentalists is that the family, the people in the family are great in wisdom, dhimatam. Now this wisdom is not ordinary wisdom, so they are intelligent, or they are great in wisdom of spiritual values and spiritual knowledge, and therefore this kind of birth of an individual who takes birth in this family of great transcendentalists is called very, very rare. So durlabhataram etadhi durlabhataram loke janma yad idrisham. So this kind of birth where one takes in the family of great transcendentalists is very, very rare. So it is very important to take note of this idea of birth. So as we see, there are 84 lakh species of life, or 8.4 million species of life. So jalaja navalakshani sthavara lakshavimshati, then krimayo, rudrak. So there are different entities, different kinds of living entities. So there are the living entities in water, there are living entities in the birds and there are birds, there are trees and plants, and then there are insects and reptiles, and then there are four-legged animals, and among them there are 400,000 kinds of humans. So you can see how, even though birth is common to all these different kinds of species, 8.4 million kinds of species, they all have this birth as a common thing. But there is a great distinction in the kind of birth each of this species has got. And by each of the body that the living entity has got, its consciousness is restricted. Its facilities to move forward or to live a comfortable life is also restricted by the laws of nature. For example, now it's raining here. Not many animals know how to take shelter like humans. Humans have the intelligence to find a way to construct houses and other facilities by which they can live comfortably. But the same intelligence is not provided as that of for humans in other species of life. Now, although there are 400,000 species of humans, among them there are some are cultured, some are uncultured, and then among those who are cultured, some follow some kind of religious system, some follow other kind of religious system, and very rarely some people even take to the highest process of bhakti yoga. So we can see that even in this species, in this spectrum of people taking birth, it is very important to note that there is a lot of difference even how one takes birth. And one must question, why is this difference existing? Why is that not everyone is taking the birth the same way? Why is not everyone having same intelligence, same body, and same features or same opulences? Everyone is very different. What is the reason for that? So as we see in Bhagavad Gita and also in Bhagavatam, it is mentioned that karanam gunasangasya. So based upon the association with the modes of material nature by one's own past activities in the previous life, and we also see in Bhagavad Gita at the end of the life what one is thinking. So based upon all these factors, one gets a suitable body provided by the material nature in the next life. So we can see that it is not random that one is taking birth in a specific place, in a specific location, in a specific family. It's not random. It is governed by the laws of nature under the guidance of the Lord. So here we see that to even get a good birth, is not very easy. It is not random either. And it requires, so one must recognize that if someone is born in a family of rich aristocratic family, or if one has got good education, or if one has got good beauty, or one has got good knowledge, they all are because of something that the living entity has done in the past. And it's not random that one is put in a certain family or in a certain situation. So among all these different kinds of the people, Prabhupada in the purport explains that Prabhupada uses one more word. It is certainly very fortunate to take birth in such families. So Prabhupada uses this word called fortunate. So one may think why Prabhupada is referring that taking birth in the family of transcendentalists to be very fortunate. Now, the word fortunate can mean many, many things for many people. For many people, fortunate means to have a lot of money. So someone gets suddenly a lot of money, someone gets a promotion, someone gets an increment, someone thinks, oh, I've got the fortune. Or someone thinks, oh, in my wastelands, people have found there is oil. So people think, oh, you are a very fortunate man. Or someone got a lottery ticket, very fortunate. Or someone has got admission in some university, good university. Or someone has got a good job, good family, wife. So people think there are different things means fortune. But it is very important to note why this idea of being born in a family of transcendentalists is actually called very fortunate situation. This is because the word fortunate, Prabhupada explains in Nectar of Devotion in another place, fortunate means one who is very sincere and serious to know Krishna. Or one is fortunate if one is able to remember Krishna. And Prabhupada says that our misfortune has begun from the time we stopped thinking of Krishna, remembering Krishna. Forgetfulness of Krishna is the cause of our misfortune. And the all other kinds of fortune that we talked about, having wealth, good degree, good family, wife, children, car, opulences, these are not considered to be fortunate situation according to spiritual life. According to spiritual life, fortunate person is he who is able to remember Krishna, who is able to make advancement in the direction to know Krishna, to render service to Krishna. Because that is the only way to get out. Krishna bhuliya jeev bhoga vancha kare. So as soon as we forget Krishna, we are engaging in material energy, in enjoying material nature. So if Krishna is not in our consciousness, not in our memory, not in our remembrance, then we are naturally driven by the external energy of the Lord. So only those are actually considered fortunate according to the scriptures are those who are advancing or who are remembering the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna and engaging in the service of the Lord Krishna. And Prabhupada says that Krishna has given all the instructions in Bhagavad Gita. If simply one hears those instructions and accepts them and follows them, one is very, very fortunate. In another place, Prabhupada says, those are fortunate who are able to understand the instructions of the Shastras. So in various places, Prabhupada uses this word fortunate to illustrate it requires great fortune to come into the spiritual process and actually find a pure devotee of the Lord. And this word fortunate is also used in Chaitanya Charitamrita in multiple places. And one place is Kon Bhagyavan Jeev, Guru Krishna Pai Bhakti Lata Beej. Kon Bhagyavan Jeev. Who is that fortunate man? Bhagyavan. So that person is fortunate who has received the mercy of the Lord Krishna to meet a bona fide spiritual master. And by the mercy of the bona fide spiritual master, one can understand Krishna. So one is to be considered fortunate when one is coming under the shelter of the pure devotee of the Lord. And further, one is considered to be fortunate when one is able to follow the instructions of the pure devotee of the Lord, the spiritual master, when one follows, then one is said to be really, really fortunate. And this idea of fortune is very important for us, all of us, to understand, because sometimes it is very easy for us to understand various things are of importance and various things are of fortune, and therefore, because we have different conceptions of what fortune is, we try to go in different directions, thinking that those are the things which we need to find and acquire and save. So it is very important to see how this word fortunate is very important for us to understand. And let us look at a little more carefully in the purport what Srila Prabhupada is explaining, that a child born in such a family receives spiritual impetus from the very beginning of his life. So, as we see, the real fortune is to always remember Krishna, is to perfect one's life in Krishna consciousness. Now, this requires a certain push, because in the material world, we forget the Supreme Lord, we forget our spiritual identity. The living entity's misfortune is that the living entity who is pure in consciousness is now covered with impure material consciousness. So, there is a certain ignorance or nescience. That means the living entity is not identifying or knowing one's own identity, neither the identity of the Lord. So, there is a complete forgetfulness of these two identities. And therefore, activities of the living entities are driven by material nature. And because of this, the living entity who is supposed to experience true happiness and eternity and full of knowledge is now in the state of nirananda, lack of happiness, true happiness, lack of knowledge, with achit and asat. He is living a temporary life which is full of fear. And therefore, the living entity is actually what the living entity can have, and what the living entity is possessing in this material condition of life, which is full of miseries, is a very misfortune situation. But even to understand this is not easy, and therefore, one requires spiritual impetus. Impetus means a force which pulls us in a specific direction. Now, there are different kinds of forces that act in this material world. So, people want people to grow in the material direction of different ways. So, to acquire good material education, get good material job, get good material family. So many people are driving everyone to go in this impetus of material life. But it is very rare fortune that a child from the very beginning of the life can acquire a spiritual impetus. And this spiritual impetus is very essential, because without spiritual impetus, one cannot come to one's real senses. And therefore, this birth of a child in this transcendental family is very, very special, because it is providing that spiritual impetus which is required for one to become truly fortunate, to truly make perfection of one's human life. And Prabhupada says that usually, especially the case, it is the case in the Acharya or Goswami families. So, especially there are many acharyas, there are different lineages, there are different paramparas, and there are different families of acharyas which are coming down, and usually one can find children born in such families to be very, very fortunate. Such families are very learned and devoted by tradition and training. So, this is another very important point, that these families are just not some sort of caste brahmanas or some sort of title brahmanas, but rather they are who are actually learned in this knowledge of spiritual values and knowledge. And such families are very learned and devoted. So, another aspect is not just learning but devotion. So, they practically perform spiritual activities, the activities of devotional service by tradition and training. So, not only they are coming, Prabhupada is making this point very clear, that they are not only coming just by tradition, but also by training. And this is very important point. Prabhupada mentions in various other places that training is an essential element, that even though one is born in a certain family, certain training is necessary for one to actually advance and perfect, and thus they become spiritual masters. So, by tradition and training, and thus they become spiritual masters. So, that means that although the children may be born in the families of acharyas or Goswamis, but they need to be trained, and then they become spiritual master. Prabhupada also mentions another important point here, that they have now degenerated due to insufficient education and training. So, many such acharya families, Prabhupada says, have degenerated due to insufficient education and training. So, Prabhupada is bringing this point again and again. It's very important to note this idea of training. Even though one child may be born in a very fortunate position, but if there is no sufficient training, then there is no enough, that the spiritual impetus is not actually translating into completion of the perfection of the individual child. And therefore, the child must be given both education and training in order to perfect the child's success. By the grace of the Lord, there are still families that foster transcendentalists generation after generation. But Prabhupada is also saying there is hope. By the mercy of the Lord, there are still families where devotees take birth and they continue the legacy of the acharyas or the Goswamis. And in this case, Prabhupada is giving example of his own life and the life of his spiritual master, Om Vishnupada Shri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj. So, it's very interesting actually to study Prabhupada's life, and actually Prabhupada, whatever Prabhupada is mentioning here, it's very well described in the first chapter of first volume of Leelamrita, Srila Prabhupada Leelamrita. In the first chapter, which describes Prabhupada's childhood, we will briefly take a look at some of the activities of Srila Prabhupada and the activities of his parents, and how those are very important to see how taking birth in a family of devotees, transcendentalists who are learned, who are great in wisdom, how it is actually very important and how much we can learn from that. And especially for parents who are taking care of children, it is very important to take note of this instruction. Srila Prabhupada has given various instructions to various devotees as how to take care of children. And Prabhupada always said, these are Vaikuntha children, they must be taken care. And Prabhupada used to say that they are the future of our movement, and they must be properly guided and trained. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada laid a lot of emphasis on how children are to be dealt and taken care, especially in a Krishna conscious way. And let us also see what are the activities and goals of a great transcendentalist and how they bring up children. So, we will take some pastimes from the Srila Prabhupada Leelamrita. I'll just I'll just briefly share how Srila Prabhupada was brought up by Gaur Mohan De and Rajani, Prabhupada's mother. It is very, very instructive in the way Srila Prabhupada was brought up. So, let us see what are the goals of a Vaishnava parent and what kind of goals Gaur Mohan De had for Srila Prabhupada. Gaur Mohan wanted Vaishnava goals for his son. He wanted Abhay to become a servant of Radharani, to become a preacher of Bhagavatam, and to learn the devotional art of playing mridanga. He regularly received sadhus in his home, and he would always ask them, please bless my son, so that Srimati Radharani may be pleased with him and grant him her blessings. So, this is very instructive. See, this kind of goal for a child does not usually come. So, this is spiritual impetus, that the parents want the child to only attain spiritual perfection and always be engaged in devotional service. So, here Gaur Mohan De is saying that wanted only Vaishnava goals for his son. So this is a great fortune. Usually it is so much of trouble for a child who wants to become Krishna conscious. Parents will say, why are you spending your time here? You have to get good grades, you have to get so many other things. There are so many other goals that we have for you, and you are not paying attention to them. And immediately they become very agitated, unhappy. But here is Gaur Mohan De, and he has got only one kind of goals for his son, and that is all our Vaishnava goals. He wanted Abhay to become a servant of Radharani, to become a preacher of the Bhagavatam, and to learn the devotional art of playing mridanga. So this is very, very important, because as parents, as guardians, it is important, because who are under our shelter, it is important to guide them with proper goals. And there's so much of simply by reading the first chapter of this Leelamrita again and again can be very instructive on how Gaur Mohan De brought up Prabhupada. Very, very wonderful instructions on how one should raise a child. And there are, you can also see that whenever sadhus, so one of the good qualities of Gaur Mohan De was every day at least 5 or 6 people would come to their house, and they would feed prasadam. They would invite sadhus and others to come, and they would give them prasadam. They would feed them, and you can see what is the desire that is being asked. He would always ask the sadhus, please bless my son, so that Srimati Radharani may be pleased with him and grant him her blessings. So this is the kind of prayers that my son should become a good devotee. He should excel in spiritual life. He should progress. He should serve. So these are the blessings that one must come and ask sadhus, and ask Prabhupada and Gaur Nitai, and instead of asking many other things, because in due course of time, based upon individual's ability, one may obtain certain things. But these kind of blessings are very rare. So this is very instructive. Then let us see how Gaur Mohan De responds when Prabhupada's mother, Prabhupada was known as Abhay Charan, for who do not know. So Abhay Charan means one who is fearless, having taken shelter of Lord Krishna's lotus feet. So Srila Prabhupada's mother, Abhay Charan's mother, when she said she wanted him to become a British lawyer when he grew up, which meant he would have to go to London to study. One of the Mullik uncles thought it was a good idea, but Gaur Mohan would not hear of it. If Abhay went to England, he would be influenced by European dress and manners. He will learn drinking and women hunting. Gaur Mohan objected, I do not want his money. So not only the goals of a Vaishnava parent is not only to help to see the advancement in Vaishnava goals, but also the avoidance of material goals. So sometimes we get too much tempted to, in a society of peer pressure and so many other things, there is a tendency to excel materially, and that is the criteria of success. That is the criteria of value of a person. Who is valuable? Who is materially intelligent? Who is materially more valuable in earnings, or different designations one has got. But it is important, as Vaishnava parents, we must be very careful as to what degree of material things, even if one aspires, how much are we asking for, and why are we asking that for. And Gaur Mohan objected, I do not want his money. So this is a clear perspective, and this is called fortune, because for someone, because in this age when everyone is driven by this idea of material wealth and power as the only means of success, very few can recognize that the futility of these values of this material money and power. And then from the beginning of Abhay's life, Gaur Mohan had introduced his plan. He had hired a professional mridanga player to teach Abhay the standard rhythms for accompanying Kirtana. Rajani had been skeptical. What is the purpose of teaching such a young child to play the mridanga? It is not important. But Gaur Mohan had his dream of a son who would grow up singing bhajans, playing mridanga, and speaking on Srimad Bhagavatam. So this is very important. So, especially when the child is growing, young age is a very important age where culturing the right spiritual values is of great importance. And as parents, especially devotee parents, it is much more important to make sure that the children are spiritually nourished. Just like everyone is so much concerned about how they are doing in classes and things, we should be equally concerned about their spiritual nourishment. Are they able to get enough spiritual wisdom, understanding and practices and association of devotees and deities, and engage them in some sort of services? Those are very important, and one should not lose out those goals in pursuit of the other goals that one has. And then it was also important to see that the Gaur Mohan De and the Mullik family in the Harrison Road, they would actually celebrate this Rath Yatra festival as it was done in Puri. So they would take 3 carts. So Abhay was enamored with the Rath Yatra festivals of Lord Jagannath held yearly in Calcutta. The biggest Calcutta Rath Yatra was the Mulliks, with 3 separate carts bearing the deities of Jagannath, Baldev and Subhadra. Beginning from the Radha Govind temple, the carts would proceed down to Harrison Road for a short distance and then return. The Mulliks would distribute large quantities of Lord Jagannatha's prasadam to the public on this day. So, Srila Prabhupada, Abhay Charan, was exposed to this festivities of Lord Jagannath, and seeing this wonderful procession that's going on, and having heard about Puri's Rath Yatra, this naturally brings, even when Prabhupada mentions in other places that how Parikshit Maharaj and even in fact Uddhav, in their childhood they used to play with the dolls of Lord Krishna, Rama, and they would dress them, they would feed them, and they would engage in various kinds of services. And Prabhupada says that in this way children are trained from the very beginning of their life to appreciate the supremacy of the Lord and to engage in service. And similarly here you can see when Srila Prabhupada was seeing that this Rath Yatra carts moving in front of their homes, starting from Radha Govind temple, Prabhupada also desired that he must have his own cart. And as we see, immediately Prabhupada says, so Prabhupada immediately goes to his father and he says, no, I also want a similar Ratha, I also want to celebrate my own Rath Yatra festival, and I want to lead a procession. And Gaur Mohan De and Srila Prabhupada, they would go out to find a beautiful cart, but it was very, very expensive, and neither they could find one which is affordable. And eventually they had to return back to their home, and Srila Prabhupada was still very adamant that I want one Ratha, I want to celebrate the festival. And on the way, when Srila Prabhupada was crying, an old lady saw and she asked, why is the child crying? And Gaur Mohan explains that he is looking for a cart to celebrate the festival, Rath Yatra festival, and he requires a smaller cart, and we are looking for it. We could not find it. And then she says, I have one cart, I can give it to you. Immediately she goes and brings one cart. And then Gaur Mohan De would paint, along with Prabhupada, Abhay Charan, paint the Ratha, so that Abhay Charan, Srila Prabhupada wanted the Ratha as original as possible. And therefore they had to refurbish it, put more supporting sticks, and make it more stronger, more beautiful. And eventually they also had the horses kept in front of the chariot, and there was then it was beautifully decorated, and then Srila Prabhupada would pull this Ratha, and in fact Prabhupada did an 8-day festival procession, just like as it is done in Jagannath Puri. So Prabhupada took this Ratha in procession, and all the neighboring kids also followed them doing Kirtana. And Prabhupada's mother, she made every day wonderful offerings to the Lord, and it was also distributed to others. And seeing this, even the family members who are surrounding to their home, they made wonderful preparations for Lord Jagannath, and they also came and then distributed to others. So, and Gaur Mohan's friends, they saw and they told, "Oh, you have not invited us for such a beautiful procession?" Then Gaur Mohan said, "This is only for children." Then they started laughing and saying, "Oh, you are separating us from being a part of this wonderful festival? What is this?" So Prabhupada created a wonderful festive environment where everyone was relishing, enjoying the festivities. So this is the opportunity. This is the fortune of a child being brought up in a Vaishnava, in a transcendentalist family, where one is exposed to these principles of devotional life from very young age. In fact, Srila Prabhupada, so the Gaur Mohan there, or the family is also known as the Mulliks, so they were also taking care of Radha Krishna worship, and they have built a temple called Radha Govind Temple. And every day Srila Prabhupada, before breakfast, either with his mother, father, or with a servant, would go and take darshan of the Lord. So this practices of having darshan of the Lord every day before starting their day, and Prabhupada used to also go with his friend to see the lordships, take darshan, hear the kirtans, the arati, and all of the different activities that are happening in the temple, and those would leave a great impression. Prabhupada is a pure devotee, and you can see how this is naturally happening to Prabhupada from his beginning of his life. Similarly, Prabhupada also says that his father would come every day in the evening, and he would do puja to the Lord, and then he would read either Chaitanya Charitamrita or Srimad Bhagavatam, and then he would go to bed. So these are the principles that as a child, these are the spiritual impetus that one finds when one is born in the family of transcendentalists. There are many other pastimes which are beautifully described there, of how Gaur Mohan would treat Abhay Charan with love and affection. And even when Gaur Mohan would want to chastise Abhay Charan, he would say, he would apologize first for chastising, and he would say, even Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was chastised, so I am also chastising you only for your betterment. He would kind of apologize and then chastise a little bit, but with a lot of love and affection. And Prabhupada always remembers how Gaur Mohan was a pure devotee, and how later that was reinforced by his meeting with his spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj. So it is also important to note, Prabhupada is mentioning about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj. Even Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj, from the very young age, Bhaktivinoda Thakur was praying for a child. He was praying, "Oh Lord, how can this movement of Lord Chaitanya be spread all over the world? I do not have enough strength. I need someone who can spread this across." And then when Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj was born, he was, from very young age, he was trained in this study of scriptures, and by the age of 5, he could recite the entire Bhagavad Gita, all the shlokas, and even explain the shlokas. And later on, Bhaktivinoda Thakur would engage Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj in various typesetting, editing, and other kinds of work for the magazines and other literary works that Bhaktivinoda Thakur was doing. And he would also take him along with him to different pilgrimage places, and the places where he would discuss with other scholars or sages or people from different traditions. And in one such place, where in one of the pilgrimage, when Bhaktivinoda Thakur was talking with Sri Sampradaya followers, that conversation led further spiritual impetus for Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj to renounce many of the other activities and focus purely spreading in the message of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So in this way we can see there are different instances of how being born in such environment propels spiritual progress very naturally without any artificial endeavor or and that happens from very beginning of the life. And Prabhupada also is mentioning that later on we met by the order of the transcendental system. So Prabhupada again and again says that I inculcated these principles from my father, and later these were more reinforced by my meeting with my spiritual master. So similarly, we are also fortunate in some way. Prabhupada says all Krishna conscious, all of his disciples and followers are very fortunate that we are also getting this unique opportunity to meet a pure devotee of the Lord. Now it is our duty to reinforce this by following the instructions of the spiritual master and to sincerely serve. And by doing this, one can see that we can also become very fortunate and in fact even perfect our life actually. So just to summarize, it is important to understand that the various kinds of birth each and everyone receives is not random. It is based upon one's desires, one's past activities, and to the different degrees of activities, pious, impious, one has done, one's life is actually determined by various factors to what the individual would take in the next life. And it is important to recognize the children who are born in devotee families must be especially taken care and must be given more spiritual opportunities to progress in spiritual life. Furthermore, it is also important for us to recognize the importance of what it means to be fortunate. Fortunate means to actually remember Krishna always. And forgetting Krishna is our beginning, is the beginning of our misfortune. So all our activities, we must be conscious to see that we go towards becoming more and more fortunate, and that's the training that we receive from the spiritual master as how we can move forward in that direction of becoming more and more fortunate by the following the process given by the spiritual master. And then, as we saw in the life of Srila Prabhupada, how Gaur Mohan De, how he had Vaishnava goals for Srila Prabhupada, as how he should receive the mercy, become a servant of Srimati Radharani, get the blessings of various sadhus, so that Srimati Radharani be pleased with Abhaycharan, and how he must become a preacher of Srimad Bhagavatam and learn Mridanga. So these are the Vaishnava goals. So every parent also must have Vaishnava goals. In fact, having only Vaishnava goals is the highest, best thing to do. And then it is also important that Prabhupada is mentioning that training is equally important. Although one may be born in a fortunate position, but if one can also misuse that position. So Prabhupada says even in the spiritual world, the living entity has the ability to misuse that minute independence. And so is the case in any fortunate situation the living entity has. So we all have to be conscious and careful that we are all fortunate to come under the shelter of Srila Prabhupada and take it forward from here by strictly following the instructions and even perfect our life and make ourselves very fortunate. I'll stop here and see if there are any questions or comments. Okay, if there are no questions or comments, we'll stop here. Granthakar Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki, Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki, Nitai Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari Bol. Thank you all for joining. Hare Krishna.